Okay, I make that just after 11 o'clock. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to LCMB's May webinar. As I said, if you could keep your cameras and your mics switched off unless you're asking a question. As we go through our discussion today, if you have a question, drop it into the chat and we'll raise it with the panelists as we proceed. And equally, there'll be an opportunity at the end to ask questions before we wrap up. So this morning, we're talking about how to prepare for, benefit from, and speed up your carbon emission reductions for your organization. And I'm delighted to have three excellent and exciting guests. We've got Ahmed Goga, the Director of Strategy and Programs from Oxlep, Michael Still, who's the Energy Contracts Director from WE E&S Solutions, and Steve Kellett, the Sustainability Manager from Argent. Just by way of introduction, Ahmed is as I said, the Director of Strategy and Programs at Oxlep, and it's my very great pleasure to have been working with Ahmed over the last couple of years on the Clean Growth Advisory subgroup at Oxford. So Ahmed has over 20 years leadership experience and has been working over the last couple of years, very much driving sort of Oxford's energy strategy and industrial strategy. And Ahmed will say a little bit more about that over the course of this morning. And also joining us this morning is Michael Still. Michael, as I said at the beginning, is the Energy and Contracts Director at WE's E&S Solution. Michael provides technical and commercial management within the WE performance contracting team, and he's been working on delivery of energy saving and carbon reduction projects since 2009, so over the last decade, including large-scale renewables such as PV. And our third guest is Stephen Kellett. Stephen is the Sustainability Manager for Argent. He works in property development as Argent's Sustainability Manager and is very much focused on the regeneration of King's Cross. So can I just remind us to switch off our microphones, please? There's a little bit of feedback. So if you could switch off your microphones and camera, that will just help with the experience. Thank you very much. So Steve has been working at King's Cross. He's responsible for driving the environmental sustainability agenda across Argent's activities at a corporate and project level. And prior to that, he has experience across the built environment, working in sustainability roles with Mason CBRE. He sits on the UK Green Building Council Member Advisory Group and lectures at the University of Westminster. So as you can see, we have an excellent panel for this morning's discussion. My name's John O'Brien. I'm the MD and founder of LCMB, and with me this morning is Rudy Duplessis, our Director of Operations, and Rudy will chair the guest panel discussion. Most of you probably know us by now, but just for those of you who don't, LCMB is a business that is looking to transform the impact our clients' workplaces, buildings and estates have on the life of organizations, their people and customers. And over the last decade, we've been very much involved in the energy reduction, carbon reduction journey for our clients. So the objective for today is to discuss and hopefully give you some practical tips, insights, and takeaway ideas as to how you and your organization can reduce and benefit from carbon emissions over the coming months and years. So before I pass to Rudy and our guest panelists, I was just thinking it might be helpful to frame our discussion with a few thoughts on where to start. So as I said, over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, we've been working with a range of clients looking at energy conservation, energy reduction, carbon management, and more recently, net zero carbon plans. And I think the example of the NHS, who are the largest organisation and perhaps one of the largest carbon emitters in the UK, is a good place to start. So if we take them as an example, what they've done is looked at defining their target in terms of looking at the baseline carbon emissions that they emit, looking at their scope 1, scope 2, and 3, and thinking about what they can do with the areas of influence. So the scope 1 is their direct carbon emissions through fossil fuel facilities, anesthetics, refrigerant, lease vehicles, and NHS fleet. So they're looking to mitigate and reduce the emissions in that area. Scope 2 is their indirect, which is electricity. And scope 3, they've split into the area that they can influence and the area which is harder to influence. So what the NHS has done is set themselves a net zero target of 2040 for the scope 1 and 2, and a 2045 for scope 3. And the way they're tackling reducing their emissions is firstly to identify where the carbon emissions come from and aligning the focus on the areas with the biggest savings and thinking about where they can actually get both carbon emissions, climate change impact and commercial gain. And then in addition, what they've done is heat mapped the carbon emissions across their infrastructure and across their activity. And what that's doing is helping them define a target, create a baseline, and create a range of activity that both aligns their carbon emission reduction and their commercial activity. So I'm just putting that out as perhaps an example of where to start if you're a little overawed by the carbon challenge. A very good place is to look and copy, I guess, the examples and trajectory that organisations such as the NHS have made and will be making over the coming years. So what I'm going to do now is pass to my colleague Rudy Duplessis, who will introduce our guests and take us through a discussion. As I said at the beginning, if you have any questions, please drop them into the chat and we'll take them as we go. And when we get to the end of our panel discussion, there'll be an opportunity for final questions. So thank you, and I'll pass over to Rudy.
Thank you, John. Morning, everyone. So Michael, Steve, and Ahmed, if I can ask you to switch your cameras on so that the lovely people can see you, please. Thank you. As John said, I'm the Director of Operations at LCMB. So in no particular order as they appear on my screen, I'll start with you, Ahmed. Can you say a little bit more about your role and how the UK's carbon journey impacts you personally and your organisation in your day-to-day operations?
Yes, so I'm the Director of Strategy and Programmes at Oxlet. We're a private company, limited by guarantee, but we operate from licence with government. And our remit is to advance the economic development of the Oxfordshire region, and in particular to attract investment to drive jobs and employment growth. The main thrust of our work increasingly over the last few years has been very much in driving the agenda around net zero and to encourage business to be thinking much more clearly about the opportunities that come with moving towards a low carbon and ultimately a net zero agenda, and also a wider conversation about what Oxfordshire's dynamic innovation ecosystem could do to accelerate the technology associated with zero carbon and how we can bring that to life, not just for businesses, but also for local communities as well. And we've been investing in a number of projects in the last 5-6 years specifically to advance and accelerate those opportunities as well.
Thanks, Ahmed. Michael, if I come to you next.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Michael Still, Energy Contracts Director for Bouygues Energies and Services Solutions in the UK. We are part of the wider Bouygues Construction organisation, a global construction and services company, private sector. We, in the UK, deliver both construction and services solutions, and within our services solutions business, we have an energy performance contracting team. And really, in terms of how the UK carbon journey is impacting us, we are a support and delivery service provider for both public and private sector, and we deliver directly to private sector and public sector organisations on the renewable energy and energy efficiency front, leading to carbon savings, and through supporting our facilities management customers where they're looking to decarbonise their building portfolios and assets. So it's very much a day-to-day project and role that we are involved in, and the UK carbon journey is a significant part of what we do, and we're seeing it increase day by day at the moment.
Thanks, Michael. And then last but not least, Stephen, for you, the same question.
Hi. Yeah, so I work for Argent, who are a property developer and asset manager. We focus on large-scale regeneration projects in London, most notably King's Cross, which is nearing the end of the construction phase. That's about 8 million square feet of mixed-use space. And we've got a new project coming out called Brent Cross, which is in North London, and that's about 10 million square feet, so a little larger than King's Cross. And my role is to make sure everything that we do through the design and construction of our buildings is environmentally responsible and low carbon, and the management of our buildings. So we're not a developer that sells buildings afterwards, we tend to keep them. So it's ensuring that in operation they're low or zero carbon. And yeah, for us, it's really is about future-proofing our estates to make sure they're still relevant in tomorrow's world as well as today's, and really tenant attraction. So we've got some great large occupiers in our estates, such as Google and Facebook and Nike. And frankly, they probably wouldn't move their headquarters to our buildings if we didn't have a plan for net zero carbon, or indeed built them to BREEAM outstanding standards. So yeah, for us, it's essential to what we do, and we wouldn't be where we are if we didn't know what we were doing around sustainability.
Thank you very much. Before I come to the questions proper, just a little reminder for all our attendees: if you do have a question, please feel free to put your hand up using the little icon, or type it in the text. We might not come to it straight away, but we will get to them. So the first question, and since politics is a bit in the news with Cummings and his doings, the UK set a target for carbon reductions which were legally binding in 2008. It was the first country to do so. But do you see that the public and political support for carbon reduction is changing? Is it enhancing? Is it reducing? Is it getting better or worse? And particularly thinking in terms of the life of this current parliament. So Stephen, since you finished last, can I come to you first?
Thanks. Yeah, so for us, I guess clearly we need a license to operate, and we need to get planning permission, which is driven by politics or kind of political support, and that is one thing. But generally, we see the private sector and where our investors, what their expectations are, and our occupiers, like I mentioned, their expectations go beyond where government has been and is going. So it's like us and our competitors in the central London market. I guess we see ourselves as always trying to push a little ahead anyway. What I would say from my last 10 years experience in sustainability, it's the lack of consistency which has really scared off investment, whether it's been in investment into rooftop solar or in generally large scale solar. That changing a policy every couple of years has made people less willing to make the big commitments that are necessary. Now it feels like there's such a huge wave of desire to get things done and to change things from every sector, whether it's local or national, and local government setting climate emergencies, and the large Paris Agreement and the contributions made from every country, that the tide seems to have shifted. And every day now you're seeing news pop up, whether it's the G7 committing not to funding coal investment, through to actually America getting their act together. It feels now that there is enough momentum where people can be confident enough to do the right thing and know that the politics will back them up in a few years' time.
Okay. Thank you. Michael, same question for you. I suppose from your point of view, you're dealing more directly with clients and their view.
Yeah, certainly. So political and public support, certainly on the political front. So one of the key areas that we've seen most recently is the public sector decarbonisation scheme that the government has put out, and that's been 2 phases now. Phase 1 was £1 billion. Phase 2 was 75 million for heat pumps and degasification of heating. Those commitments have basically been twofold: the fact that they are sustainability and carbon net zero led, but also part of the economic recovery boost for the UK economy coming out of COVID. So the government is taking the opportunity to bring those two factors together, which is fantastic, and that is helping the growth in sustainability and decarbonisation. And I think that will be the sign of things to come, where more and more of that grant money is made available to the public sector, which then allows technology expansion, business growth in those areas as well, and that will lead into improvements for private sector that can follow on where that money and development has taken place in the public sector.
Thank you very much. Ahmed, last but not least.
So I think, building on what Michael and Stephen have said, I think there's a different turning point in the agenda. There is a much greater affirmation of this as being business as usual, rather than something that's done on the side over here that people dabble in. So I think there's a significant shift in that point. I think there's a couple of other things to reflect on as well, particularly from the point of view where I'm sitting in Oxford, where there's a very clear commitment to develop a spatial plan, which is very focused and anchored within a zero carbon net negative ambition, and also within the context of the Oxford and Cambridge Arc development, which is also setting an ambition to be the green arc as well. So there are a number of important policy levers linked to growth ambitions that are now very much focused around the concept of zero carbon. I think there's a couple of things, though, that we need to bear in mind, which I'm always adding in as riders whenever I'm in these sorts of meetings. And there's twofold. First of all, let's not lose sight of the fact that the journey to net zero, whether it's 2028, which seems the most ambitious one I've seen from a city, which is Nottingham, to 2050, which is or 2045, based on recent changes as well. The journey to that date is incredibly challenging because most of the low-hanging fruit has now all been mopped up. Most places are at about 50% from their baseline, but the remaining 50% target is incredibly challenging, and the societal and industrial change that will require is considerable. And it's not just a question of waiting for regulatory change from government. There's going to need to be proactive shifts and changes from business and from individuals and whole sections of communities as well, in terms of planning and other things, for example, that are going to be required to get to that. And I always caution on the basis of setting these arbitrary dates, because actually they're really meaningless, because the actual ability to get to those will require significant societal issues. And to illustrate the point, we're still emerging from the pandemic. The biggest user of single-use plastics right now is the NHS. It's as a result of PPE and other things right now, that is providing considerable carbon back into the economy, for want of a better phrase, as well. And that's only going to continue for some considerable time as we continue to battle COVID, for example. So there are continuing technological challenges that will keep hitting us, that will bring us back. So it's really important to understand the journey to net zero, and the ambition is going to be one that's going to go over several phases. And that's going to require innovation, and that's going to require many different actors moving forward, not just waiting for government. And really, one final point, if I may, I always make this point as well when I'm in these fora where we are all essentially invested in this agenda. That's why we're part of it, and that's why we're having it. I always ask everyone to bear in mind how this comes back to the individual. What does it mean for the single mum with a couple of kids and trying to hold down 2 jobs, living on the 4th floor of a tower block in a deprived ward in Oxford or in London, or that she doesn't have the choices most of us do, and there are many of people like her. How do we make it relevant, and how do we make it easier for the likes of her as well, whether it's in terms of transport, getting to the jobs she's got to do to get food on the table, whether it's about the sort of food choices she's got to make rather than moving everyone to organic or vegan diet. All these things are part of messaging, which really is very important as part of getting the whole of society and consumers behind this agenda. So it's a much more challenging arena than just the political regulatory areas as well.
Thanks. You must have your seeing into the future goggles on as well, because you've neatly answered my next question too. so my next question was going to be, what do you think is the greatest challenge on the journey to net zero carbon? So Ahmed, thank you for preempting my question and answering it. Michael, if I can come to you.
So the government is hinging most of its carbon net zero journey on 2 core areas of policy. That's the electrification of transport and also the decarbonisation of heating in terms of the big wins. There are lots of other facets, obviously, but those are the two key target areas in policy. And in terms of achieving their 2030 and 2050 targets, the challenges associated with those is basically a change or move from gas heating and the reduction in the gas consumption for the UK, increase in electrical loading on the electrical grid infrastructure for both electrification of vehicles and charging, and also the heating side of things. So there's massive constraints ahead that need to be dealt with in terms of the national grid and also at distribution network operator level on the electrical infrastructure. So that's a key challenge. And then I think the other one worth touching on is technology development. We are at the beta versus VHS video position in terms of technology. So there's a lot going into electric vehicle charging, charge points, electric vehicle development, autonomous vehicles, but could all that be swept aside by hydrogen vehicles in 5 years' time? There's a big debate to be taken there.
That's an interesting point. Stephen, from your point of view?
Yeah, I agree what Michael just said. I think for me, the big shifts, whether that's the electrical grid or like electric vehicles, a lot of government can put their weight behind it, and that shift might just happen. I'm kind of worried about the retrofit challenge, and it kind of goes back to your last question of government lack of consistency actually has been in the Green Homes Grant, where there's been a lot of flip-flopping around that, and the right kind of policy lever hasn't been found for the last 10, 20, forever years. And that seems to be the bit where I don't know what the government's plan is, and I don't know if the government does, but that involves every single individual household, be private homeowners, forking out 20 grand on insulation, glazing, electrifying their boilers or their heat. And I just don't know how we're going to force every single individual private household to spend 20 grand. I don't know where they're going to find that money. I think for, where it's owned by local authorities or private businesses, like our offices will certainly look to electrify things and do what's needed. But yeah, there's an awful lot of our carbon footprint that is reliant on individual households. So don't get me wrong, no part of the net zero carbon journey is going to be easy, but some of the easier aspects seem to be renewable electricity. I think heat is going to be really hard, but I think renewable electricity, there's enough private finance in it where you actually make returns on it, so people are going to put money into it. But yeah, and the other thing is, Ahmed touched on it, but diet changes as well, how we shift people away from eating so much meat. Not necessarily, you don't need to be vegetarian, don't need to be vegan, just have chicken rather than cows would be a good start. But that involves a lot, and I think in lieu of any kind of completely all-encompassing carbon tax, I don't know how we're going to do it.
Okay. That's an interesting point, and you mentioned private households, but if we can focus on UK organisations for the next bit, what do you think organisations have to be doing in order to prepare? And if I come to you, Steve, because you were starting to answer that question already.
It depends on the organisation, clearly, and I think the first thing to do is to understand what your carbon footprint is, scope 1, 2, and 3, and then focus on the biggest part of that pie. Don't get distracted with plastic straws or something. Like, I'm a sustainability manager, I have to do some of the, want a better term, fluffy stuff, and I'm drawn away all the time from doing where I can spend my time most effectively, whether it's superfluous reporting or whether it's doing nice campaigns. But everyone should be incentivized to just look at where your biggest chunk of your carbon footprint is and just put all your energy, literal renewable energy, into changing that. And I think that would be the first thing for any business, just understand where you can make the biggest difference, not necessarily the one that will make your company look the nicest, just the one that will make the biggest difference. And then the virtuous circles of that positive brand association will come out of that, because I think people, hopefully, maybe not now, maybe in 5 years' time, will recognize when you make the genuine big commitments and the big changes rather than the small ones that might be more consumer friendly today. And frankly, if you do the right thing now, you might start to get some economic benefit as well, whether that if you're a business and looking at whether to electrify your heating or change to renewables or do something which is more consumer friendly, it's probably renewables which are going to make the biggest difference to your business. But yeah, for us as business, some of the easier stuff is on the operational efficiency and where we get our energy from. The harder parts are where we get our concrete from, because whatever you do with concrete, you need to burn the cement, create the cement at 800 degrees, 1000 degrees, and there isn't really anything apart from gas that can do that today. Hydrogen is hoped for, but yeah, that doesn't exist at the moment, and same with steel. So for us, I know where our biggest challenge is. It's going to take a few years to figure out, and I expect every business has their very hard bit, which they need to start thinking about now.
Okay, thanks, David. Ahmed, if I can come to you next.
Yeah, I think a company like Argent, as Steve said, a major employer, major business, working with a lot of primes as well. It's always worth bearing in mind the UK economy is essentially a small business economy, so a micro economy as well. And in most economies within the regions, there'll be micro businesses, employing sort of 1 to 20 sort of size businesses. And the work that needs to be done with those employers is considerable. Most probably still haven't done an energy audit of any kind. They won't necessarily appreciate what their carbon footprint is right now, but also what that then translates into potential business opportunities that come with it. You also need to look at it from different sector points of view as well. We're seeing a significant transition going on within, for example, the manufacturing and automotive sector, for example, particularly through the supply chains, where you're driving down a strategy around greening the supply chain. And so businesses are seeing the fundamental shift that's taking place, but also the opportunities that come with that. There are different sectors that are at different points in their journey, and I think it's important to understand what the drivers are within individual markets that then will bear the most return as well. So I think there's a number of facets that come with this. But at a macro level, I think businesses, particularly coming out of the pandemic, are sort of reassessing and reappraising a number of things, including supply chains, moving to just in case rather than just in time. And that as well comes with an opportunity to look at where you are sourcing and supplying and has a link to reducing your footprint. I also think that there is an incredible shift in consumer interest to more ethical purchasing as well. That is still coming through in a strong way as you move towards more online trading as well. So I think there are a number of elements that are going to start to come to play. It's still fluid, but I think it's important to understand that the markets that we are talking about are very different and very dynamic. And I think there's a lot more that needs to be done with it, particularly with small companies.
Okay. Michael.
Yeah, so from our point of view and looking at the type of customer base that we work with, they are effectively organisations that own large portfolios or estates of buildings, commercial property. So I'll take it from that angle, and touching on what Stephen was talking about, also understanding the energy consumption, the carbon emission footprint that you have to start with, what the breakdown of that is, and then for asset owners, having a key understanding of the asset base, so life cycle plans, age of equipment, because some fantastic energy and carbon reductions can be achieved through planned life cycle upgrades that keep current technologies up to date and improve the operational efficiency and the reliability of buildings and assets as well. So I think taking an holistic approach to building services, mechanical and electrical assets, and where they are in their life cycle is key, and then looking at ways of how funding or replacement can be covered for those. There's lots of opportunity, lots of carbon money out there at the moment, which are investors looking for returns from replacement of M&E assets. So it's not necessarily difficult to obtain finance or funding for those types of projects, and bringing that into a strategy that maps out the life of the building and the assets and when assets can be replaced, and pre-planning assessment of the paybacks and the return on investments that you can obtain as an asset owner, rather than just running plant to the end of its life and trying to keep it going, because in fact it might be costing you more that way than prepping in advance and changing through a life cycle plan.
Thanks very much. You mentioned return on investment there. So based on that, what do you think is the greatest benefit for organizations that actually do embrace this road to net zero carbon journey?
I think it comes down to, is there an improvement on bottom line, and also the triple bottom line side of things: corporate social responsibility, carbon emission reductions, and coming back to the consumer side of things. Actually, consumers are looking for products that are more sustainable. That is also happening from a business to business perspective as well. A lot of our customers now, when we bid for facilities management contracts or energy performance contracts, we're required to provide our own carbon footprint, what we're doing to drive down that carbon footprint. And it's getting more involved now, where we actually have to provide the reporting for 3 different categories of carbon emissions for our supply chain and subcontractors as well. So having that ability to be able to provide that information, the triple bottom line, not just the bottom line, is a key area of benefit for everyone.
Okay, thank you. And Ahmed, from your point of view?
I absolutely agree with Michael. I think you're seeing a shift, for example, in public procurement as well, where there's an increasing emphasis in weighting around contracts, identifying those companies that are taking progressive and proactive steps in their carbon footprint, but also, as Michael has suggested, how you're driving that through your supply chain and your subcontracting as well. I think that is again something that will start to be seen as the norm, and you'll see a shift in the way in which contracts are weighted and then awarded as well. So I think that's absolutely key. That's an incentive, particularly those who are looking to contract through those major public sector contract routes as well. But I think also you're seeing that in major private sector prime ambitions as well, particularly, as I said, in aerospace and automotive. You're seeing that very aggressively now starting to be looked at as well. So that's going to happen. That shift will just become a tide very quickly. And I think it's the enlightened businesses that are going to think about, okay, how can I be positioned more effectively in that discussion, that will see my business seen as much more part of the future as well. And I think one other thing that's worth reflecting on as well, recruitment will be a key for people. Skills and talent continues to be a big issue that is repeatedly identified in business surveys that we undertake. And it's important to emphasize, young people coming into the labour market as well, they are looking for businesses that are providing that ethical, but also a commitment to a net zero agenda as one of the key motivating factors as well. And as we move out of the pandemic, I think that will be increasingly visible as well as the primary area of consideration as well. So I think there's a number of things that companies will need to think about as they move forward.
Okay, thank you. Clearly, all of us fall into that young people category as well. So,
well, 3 of us do, I think. Stephen looks a bit older.
Stephen, same question for you.
Yeah, I mean, echoing what Vivati said, but I think generally, going back to what I said earlier, if you're bold and authentic, and you can actually evidence what you have done on these themes, those virtuous circles will start to build in, whether it's either winning work, talent retention, talent attraction, or for us, attracting tenants to come to us, or winning contracts with local authorities or getting planning permission, etc. If you're actually doing what you say you'll do and you can evidence it and you're well versed in it, then you'll get those virtuous circles. And for us as client, when we're asking questions to suppliers, the diversity in answers is incredible. Like, some people just don't have a clue, and that really does mark them down. And some people can really talk eloquently about it. And it's no coincidence those people who talk eloquently about it are good at the other things as well. It's kind of, you don't know whether it's correlation or causation, but it certainly seems emblematic of companies that know what they're doing. If they really think about what they're doing in the future and their strategy, sustainability will be an inherent part of that. And the other bit as well is that there's far better ways of evidencing what you are doing around sustainability now. So before, when we asked about embodied carbon, so the carbon produced in the creation of materials, of the concrete that you use, we could just say, what are you doing about responsible sourcing materials or low carbon? And it wasn't really a way of measuring it, but was recognised by the industry. And now there is. So now it's much easier for other people to show what they are actually doing, and it's measurable. And I think that's consistent across different industries as well. There's far better yardsticks by the industry to actually say we are good and we're better than the others, whether that's in energy consumption as well, like UK Green Building Council or various other industry bodies are very transparent in saying this is where the industry should be. You need to mark yourself against that and be transparent. And it's the same with almost everything. People are becoming a lot more literate in understanding what is greenwash and what isn't. And I think just being on top of it, knowing what your footprint is, where you're going and how you're going to do it is essential.
That's great, thank you. So to follow that up, how do you get that message across to mobilize your own teams, your own supply chains, and everybody involved, to including your customers, to get that journey really working?
So for me, the only good way to communicate it to all of our stakeholders is by actually evidencing that we've done something ourselves. So for us, when I said we've gone out to tender and we're looking for a contractor to build a building for us, there's no use in us asking for them to do a load of stuff if we haven't shown that we've made a commitment ourselves. So we can show as a business that we've done, as an example, we've done all the stuff to get towards zero carbon at King's Cross. We bought renewable energy, etc. We decarbonised the estate. And now at Brent Cross, we say we've done this before. These are our targets for Brent Cross. It's essential to us. We can put our money where our mouth is. We need the right people to work alongside us. I think it would look very inauthentic, or it looks like us just ticking boxes if we're asking our supply chain to do a load of stuff and we're not prepared to be consistent in that. So yeah, I guess that's my response.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. And Michael, from your point of view, the same.
I think from a customer base, we're seeing that our customers are driving the agenda. Lots of our customers are local authorities and have already committed to climate emergencies. So they are changing policies to address public perception and ensure that they're on the front foot. That then feeds through into their procurement packages, what they're asking for, coming back to the supply chain side of things, what we need to provide in terms of reporting and additional information around what our supply chain partners are doing for monitoring and control of their carbon emissions as well. And then with our own internal staff and people, I think certainly within the engineering side of the business, it's a keen driver. Everyone's mobilized in their own personal way, wanting to see change, wanting to see improvements and drive the sustainability agenda and the carbon net zero agenda. So I think momentum is building. The awareness, public perception is driving the overall position where it's something that customers, supply chain and our own internal staff all want to be involved in and feel part of that movement.
Okay, thank you. Ahmed?
Yeah, I mean, from our point of view, one of the big things our responsibility we have also is to shape the narrative, shape the debate, and to provide the evidence to give people an understanding where things are. That's one of the big areas of work that we take responsibility for. And just to illustrate that, Rudy, we've just commissioned together with 11 other organizations from the public and from the private sector, the Environmental Change Institute, which is based within the University of Oxford. It's a leading academic base on clean technology and clean growth. And that piece of work is trying to address some of the myths associated with this whole journey, and also try to rebalance the conversation that is happening around net zero, because sometimes the debate gets hogged by people who shout the loudest, but often that actually skews the conversation, and that doesn't help with messaging, for example, and also the consistency of getting people to understand the opportunities, but also the issues that people need to confront as well. And so the ECI are doing a piece of work which is being published imminently, that's going to, particularly in the Oxfordshire context, set out very clearly what steps need to be taken, in which markets and in which segments, so people are aware. But also they are challenging some of the myths that are currently being floated around that maybe sometimes put people off entering this journey and going down. So messaging and also framing a much more factually based debate is very, very important in this process as well. And that's one thing we've been really addressing over this last 12 months.
Okay, thank you very much. So then, if we play a little what if game, and say, what if somebody came to you and said, we're just starting this journey, what would you tell them?
Hire LCMB.
That is clearly the right answer. Thank you very much. but
They'll all out for you.
Other than seeking the best advice available on the marketplace, what would you tell them?
Sorry, but yeah, so I think it's similar to what I said earlier, in that you need to understand, probably by actually getting experts involved, understand what your carbon footprint is, understand what your customers are asking for, and understand where you can have the biggest influence. There's some parts of your carbon footprint which you probably don't have too much control over, but it's still good to know that. And then if you don't have control over it, you can talk to the people that do have control and say that we are interested in changing this, and then that kind of ripple effect happens. But yeah, I was focusing on large companies earlier, but Ahmed said something like very true. There's a lot of SMEs out there, and it's not necessarily prudent for them, if they have 10 employees, to spend 20 grand on a consultant to give them a report to say something. So that's a really interesting challenge, and Ahmed probably knows a better answer of how they can start their journey, but certainly in terms of larger companies, it is by understanding customers, understanding their own stakeholders and what they're looking for, and just listening a little bit, but ultimately measuring first of all, and understanding what big strides you can take. So yeah, probably Ahmed might be able to answer the other bit a bit better than I do.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. I'll start to you then, Ahmed.
Well, I think that what Stephen said is actually factually correct for any business, whether it's an owner manager or whether it's a major multinational. It's just the scale at which those issues need to be understood. At the very least, you need to understand what your market is currently at, and where it's going, what your competitors are doing, and what you need to be doing. These are essentially one of the challenges, I think, particularly within the SME markets, is to demystify the talk around it. It's often seen as something over there. It's not part of what I've got to do. It's core business processes. It's a core business strategy, and it's linked to your business plan and corporate plan and your investment plans. It's that simple. It's really important that we don't overtly complicate the message and infer that it's a significant different activity. It is actually, if you want to sustain your business and if you want to move forward in the next 5 years, this is something now as a here and now. It's not something you can ignore or shy away from, because the market will leave you behind. And it's in those terms, I think, these need to be framed. But also, I would also add an additional thing. If you're looking to source contracts moving forward, this is one of the things that you're going to have to show and demonstrate and confront as well. I think if we continue to anchor it to, as Michael very eloquently described, the triple bottom line, that is the sort of messaging, particularly for small companies, that will, I think, cut through as well.
It can be intimidating though, can't it?
Yes.
If you try to do anything around sustainability, even if it's ISO 14001, you just get all this paperwork that you need to do, or if you start delving into B Corp certification, or frankly doing any kind of carbon reporting, there's suddenly a million acronyms thrown at you, and it's not their day job unless they hire a sustainability manager or something.
But there's simple things you can do, Stephen. I mean, there are things. Just carbon footprint measurement is something that an audit of a basic energy audit. These are some of the things that are actually part of insurance and other services you now take as a business anyway. And there are other areas that you should be looking at, whether it's deciding to move to a hybrid or an electric fleet. These are investments you're going to be taking over 5 years anyway. And even, if you look in the case, for example, of Oxford, where there's active consideration on moving to congestion charging or some form of workplace parking levy operation, that's also been done in Nottingham, for example. These are steps that are going to happen.
I guess I'd almost advocate, if you're a small company, don't worry about getting the tick or the certificate or anything. Just switch to electric fleet or something, because everyone knows that electric will be better than a diesel vehicle, and that is future proofing. So just go out and do it, and don't worry about getting all the ticks. They will come naturally, I guess.
Absolutely.
That supports your earlier point about focusing your energy on where it makes the most difference from the start. If I could just give Michael an opportunity to answer the same question as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rudy. I think one other point just to pick up on is leadership and policy. We've certainly seen it internally, both at the group level within Bouygues Construction and also Bouygues Energies and Services Solutions. In both instances, it's been a leadership approach, taking the strategy from the top and setting the policies and then putting the plans in place and seeing that implemented. Monitoring and reporting is also key to that. It's great to have a plan, but if no one is actually checking where we are through the process of delivering that plan, then it's hard to understand whether anything's been achieved or whether anything will be achieved and what needs to change in order to see that movement. And coming back to Stephen's point from earlier, having an understanding of what your footprint is, whether that's any energy consumption, your fleet emissions, having that data to hand that's measurable and traceable from a trend point of view, so that you can see the movement, the downward improvement that is achieved from the leadership approach and the policies that are put in place.
Okay, thank you very much. And then my last question before I hand back to John, and I'll come to you first, Michael. In terms of today's discussion and our audience and anybody who watches the recording afterwards, what would be your one top tip? What's the one bit of advice that you would give to our audience?
Okay, probably take action. We work with a lot of organizations that it is years where lots of opportunities and ideas are talked about and discussed, hundreds of thousands of pounds of energy saving opportunities that could have been taken 3-4 years down the line. The same topic is still being discussed, and invariably it's probably the financing or the funding element up front. 10% interest rate versus 8% interest rate versus not doing anything. Actually, they could have seen 300,000-500,000 pounds of savings, but because there was an interest rate involved and that was the only source of finance available, the decision was taken not to invest. So take action.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, from your point of view?
Yeah, no, I couldn't have said it better. Just be bold, just do it, and you'll see the benefits. Yeah, there's no need to complicate it.
Okay, thank you. Lastly, Ahmed?
Just really to build on what Michael and Stephen have just said, there is support there, out there. It's not as if this is a journey that you take on your own. The local enterprise partnerships like Oxlep, we have our growth hub, which provides support for businesses starting out in this process to zero carbon with free energy audits and also innovation grants and many other support mechanisms. So the support is there, especially for small companies to start on this journey and also to then continue to support and invest moving forward as well. So reach out to your local enterprise partnership, reach out to other sources of help and advice and support. Often those growth hubs will be working with the likes of LCNB and others through the private sector as well to provide that specialist advice as well. So it's a question now of just getting on and cracking on rather than continue to worry and debate.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I've seen a lot of collaboration between, our normal competitors on sustainability topics, and I haven't seen that level of collaboration on other topics, and it does help if you've got friends together in it.
Okay, thank you very much, all three of you. At this point, I'll invite John to come back on the call. I'll also open up to our audience. So any questions, please raise your hand or type it in the chat box, and we'll come to address them as soon as we can. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Rudy. I did say at the beginning that I was excited to introduce the three of you guys because having worked with you over a number of years, I knew we were going to have a rich conversation. And I'm just going to pull out and try and give an exact summary of some of the things that you said that I think will be particularly useful for people to take from today's conversation. And I'm going to begin with the almost the last point, which was to take action. I think you were suggesting if you're going to have a sustainable business, you need to get serious about sustainability because it's here and now, and we all need to be doing our part and demonstrating it. And you've got a business model that won't exist in the future if we're not playing our part and contributing to the journey for our clients and others. this issue of taking the complex and making it simple. And as Michael and Stephen said, if you take, your carbon emissions and think about, reducing the energy you're using and reducing the amount of energy you're using when you're using it, and then plugging in sustainable or renewable sources of technology, that will take you the bulk of the way. So there are simple things that you can be doing, as the guys said, here and now. You don't need the ticks. You should focus on the stuff that make the biggest difference for your business in terms of carbon and cost. And in there, I think, lies the sort of route to the future. Do what makes sense here and now, and technology will catch up with us. As Really said, there's an opportunity for questions from the floor. I do have one question I'm going to put out there, because Michael said something interesting, I think, around, Betamax versus VHS. And I do think we're on the cusp of that in a number of different areas. And hydrogen's a particularly interesting area, because we're doing quite a bit of work at a national level with National Express, moving their fleet from diesel to hydrogen and electric vehicles. And I just have a question for each of you to say, is there one technology that you think is really, really promising and has the ability to become the Netflix of the future? Starting with you, Steve.
So we've just invested in a load of land in Scotland to buy some land to plant some trees. So we're doing that because we want to offset our carbon footprint, and the cost of buying carbon certificates is increasing and will increase, and carbon taxes come in and that will increase. But in the future, there could be direct air capture where you basically mechanical trees, and there will be, not everywhere is suitable for planting trees. So I can see it as a great investment class in the future where everyone wants to get to zero carbon, but they can't. And I can just see the return on investment being there for direct air capture. At the moment, it probably costs about 500 quid a ton of carbon, but you can just see that being about 50 quid a ton, where a lot of businesses will just say, that's what we need to do, whether they're oil and gas business or whether they're real estate or anything. At the moment, I would rather people just reduce their carbon footprint and plant some trees. But I see that as technology which is only going to improve. And if it does what it's potentially going to do, you can imagine them just springing up everywhere and a lot of people making a lot of money from it.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. And Michael, from your point of view, do you see a sort of really interesting technology on the horizon?
I think it's a difficult one to call, John. I think there's probably quite a lot of technologies that are on the tipping point that are being developed and put into testing at the moment. All sorts of things, from storage using hills, basically rolling up cables up a hill and then letting it roll down again. So kinetic energy release, similarly with mine shafts, old mine shafts being used for storage. There's a myriad of different ideas out there that are being tested and becoming financially viable. So we might see lithium ion storage batteries of today all of a sudden be something completely different in 5 years' time, because the cost pounds per kilowatt for installation is a tenth of what lithium ion battery storage is at 50 megawatt scale on the grid at the moment. So I think there's a lot to still come, and I think what we'll see is a mix of different solutions across the board. Technologies, solar panels are continuing to increase in capacity, doubling every 3 to 5 years in terms of the wattage per panel. Costs are continuing to fall, but other solutions are coming in. So I think the future will be a mix rather than a single.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And Ahmed, from your point of view, is there a technology that you put great hope in?
Well, I am very fortunate to be working in an area where technology and innovation is in our DNA. There are 3 companies that are doing some fantastic work that I'm just going to name check because I think they're doing fantastic work themselves. Oxford PV, which are leading the world's most efficient solar panel technology with a peroxide technology, which will be 30% more efficient and is a game changer. You've got also in Tokamak Energy and also First Light Fusion, really pioneering companies advancing fusion technology as the next generation of heat and energy power, which is within touching distance now. It was always the holy grail of energy solutions, fusion technology. These businesses are aiming by the middle of this decade to be able to actually deliver fusion technology on a mass scale, which I think will be absolutely transformative as well.
Do you think they will? It's always been about 10 years off, hasn't it?
Well, the fact that the FT is now lining up behind it and actually thinks it's within reach, and that there's significant investor interest coming into these technology companies now, tells me that we're at that tipping point.
Wow. Yeah, if there is one silver bullet, that is it. Yeah, fingers crossed.
Well, hopefully we're going to see the silver bullet come out of the ecosystem in Oxfordshire. That would be quite a result, I think, wouldn't it? So I'm just going to offer a further opportunity. If there's any burning questions on the floor, I'm not seeing any hands or any questions. So I'm going to move on and say thank you very much to Ahmed, Michael and Steve for joining us today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure our attendees will have as well. You've given us food for thought and perhaps some ideas and insights to implement in terms of all our journeys to net zero carbon. So if you're interested or need some further guidance, there's plenty available on our website to download. Do get in contact with us if you need any help or advice. I need to connect with Steve, Michael, or Ahmed to ask any supplementary questions. And a date for your diary. Our next webinar is 11 a.m. Friday, the 25th of June. And we'll be looking at the issue of managing a safe and productive return to the workplace. The government are due to release us, assuming we don't get an issue with the Indian or other variant on the 21st of June, and we'll be re-examining how to get back to a COVID-secure, post-pandemic, productive and a safe environment in the future. You can sign on for that event via our website. So once again, I want to say thank you very much to Ahmed, Michael and Stephen for sharing their wisdom, insight and time with us this morning. Thank you very much. Stay safe. And looking out the window here in Oxfordshire, it's a glorious sunny blue day. I hope it's the same wherever you are. So thank you and goodbye, everybody.